Okie dokie. So it's only right for us to actually begin with some practice. Let's do it. So if you're not already, I just invite you to find yourself a comfortable and supportive posture for, in this case, just a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes of practice. And I often say this, so this is repetition for most of us, but when choosing your posture, already we're starting to practice because we're choosing. So already we're in the mode of intention. And as you're choosing your posture, you want to find a balanced posture, too relaxed, and your mind will follow suit with your body as it does. And it will become maybe a little too lax. Sometimes that's a good medicine for us when we're really tight and we've had a stressful day and we need to let go. Maybe we can slouch a little bit more, then let our bodies release. On the other hand, if we choose a posture that's so strong, it can be a little bit rigid sometimes. And our mind can also follow suit there. So, recognizing as you choose your posture what your intention is right now. Whatever your intention is, meaning how you want to be. Let your posture follow suit. If you haven't already, you can let your eyes drift closed or just softened. And as your eyes soften, I want you to follow the feeling of actually closing or softening your eyes back into your head. See what else can soften and release and relax and become smoother or heavier in your head. Really from the inside of your head out. Checking out the rest of your face that way. Is there something that can be a little softer here? Maybe your jaw, or your tongue, or your lips, cheeks. Just follow this down on your own time. Eventually, at some point, you'll move through your neck and your throat from the inside out. And then you'll eventually follow down to your torso, but not the outside in, from the inside out, softening. Almost feeling like you're softening your internal organs. As you do that, your posture is going to need to realign itself in order to keep supporting itself, even though you're softened. And so you'll find a more sustainable and relaxed posture that way. Following this through the rest of your body. So as you find yourself in a little more softened position, you can start to notice your breathing. I invite you to start counting your breath. On the exhales, counting, maybe starting with 1, Next exhale would be 2, 3, and so on and so forth, up to 10. You get to 10, just going back to 1. When inevitably you get lost with your count, just going back to 1. A very simple task, just counting your breaths to 10. You count, you might notice the quality of your internal count. Is there tension there? Are you fighting against thoughts that are trying to pull you this way and that? And take note of that internal experience, but principally just repeating the count to 10 each time. There's a very clear goal here. Start at 1, end at 10, go back to 1. I notice the qualities of this goal oriented activity. You notice a sense of trying to get to the next breath or anticipating a distraction. How does that show up in your body? Is there any tension? Is your internal voice reflecting a kind of rigidity or intensity of any kind? Whatever's happening with your thoughts, in this case, doesn't matter so much as long as you just keep counting to 10. We're going to shift our practice a little bit and loosen off of this goal of counting to 10. Frankly, I'll let you in on a little secret. Doesn't matter whether you make it to 10, and nobody else knows whether you made it to 10 or not. So now the practice is keep counting to 10 each breath, but no matter what, do your best to remain at peace, whether you are remembering the number, whether you're forgetting the number, whether you're paying attention to your breath, whether you're hearing a sound that's coming in. Keep your mind occupied with the count, but as you count, just remain at peace wherever your mind goes. Part of doing that is allowing your mind a little bit more room to roam, seeing if you can grip it not quite so tightly. Trust that the count will continue on its own. Just remembering that there is still this task of counting your breaths to 10, but it's no longer the goal to actually stay on the number. If there's a goal, if we can even say that, it's just to enjoy sitting here. See what that does to your experience. How does that change things? And in just a short minute, I'm going to ring a bell and you can just listen to it for as long as you can hear it. Again, just sitting here at peace as much as you can. Taking a few more moments for your practice, and as you're ready, you can start to draw your practice to a close, maybe taking some deeper breaths. Some small movements, and coming on back. Right. So that was not the 5-minute practice that I said it was going to be. We did something different. So that was a little bit of an exploration of attention versus intention. And some of you have heard me or Peter or Brooke or possibly Heather, talking about mindfulness before, and we talk about mindfulness being three things: intention, attention, and retention. Intention, attention, retention. And so often when we're practicing, and I do this as well, it doesn't really matter how much practice you have. I mean, maybe at a certain point it does, because maybe you can kick this habit, but it's so easy to fall into this expectation of meditation practice kind of being like a mental exercise or like an exercise of attention, where I'm going to decide to place my attention somewhere and it's going to stay there and I'm going to get better at keeping it there. And that's a real thing. That's a real type of exercise. There's nothing wrong with that type of attention exercise. In fact, I would say we could all use a lot more of that. In today's world in particular, there's so much technology that's so good at hijacking our um, agency of our attention. And so that process of attention, whether it's paying attention to our breath, one breath at a time, or whether it's paying attention to our phone or a notification that we're getting, these are kind of leaning on and feeding off of very old systems in the mammalian and perhaps even pre-mammalian part of our brain. So think of perhaps a dog that's getting fed at a certain timing, like people, that's known as conditioning or classical conditioning. And so maybe you ring a certain bell at a certain time and you always feed the dog at that time. And that dog comes to expect that when they hear a certain bell, there's a certain reward for them. That's the same type of pathway. And, this type of behavior or expectation is preserved even in uh, animals or beings that are less similar to us, that are, you might consider them more ancient. None of them are really ancient because they're all modern creatures, um, but perhaps less complex uh, in terms of their brain activity. And so this type of activity of learning to pay attention to certain things that are going to be particularly rewarding and then actually creating an expectation around what's going to happen next. This is a very kind of mm, old preserved system for survival skills for us as life forms on this planet. And it's part of what we're practicing. It's part of what we're engaging and learning to maybe take some more agency over in meditation practice. And so that was really the first part of what we were doing, is saying, I'm going to keep counting my breath 1 through 10. And when it comes off of it, I'm just going to go right back to it. And that's my goal. I'm just going to keep doing it. And, hopefully there's some reward for me. I've created some expectation that I'm good if I do that, or perhaps as you started to do it, your mind started to settle. That's another kind of reward that you can get. But I'll be very curious in a moment when we discuss to hear how that experience differed from the second part of our practice, which began to orient a little bit more towards what I will just informally call intention. And intention is a different mode or different orientation towards our moment to moment reality. With attention, we're saying there's some sense of control. I'm controlling where my mind is going. Or if I'm not controlling it, I'm at least noticing where it's going and perhaps trying to redirect it or trying to note what it is. So that's very attention oriented. When we go to intention, we're saying, okay, well, wherever my mind is going, how do I want to be? How do I want to engage? So for that second part, my suggestion was, okay, so keep doing this task of counting 1 through 10. It helps keep the mind at ease to have something to do. But as you're doing that, whatever you do, try to be at peace. And I could have said a different word there too. It could have been, try to engage in a loving way or a compassionate or a kind way. So all these different ways that we might decide, okay, this is how I want to be. And that's actually associated with different activity in the brain. So that's less directive of the attention, and it's more directive of our feeling or relationship to what's being experienced. So there's a lot of different activity going on, and I don't want to oversimplify things. The brain is sometimes, in a more colloquial sense, we think of brain activity as, oh, this one part of the brain is responsible for this thing, and this part of the brain is responsible for this other thing. And in reality, it's much more complicated. It's actually these different brain areas talking to each other and firing in a certain pattern, and that leads us, perhaps, or is related to us having certain experiences. So the real picture is very complex. It's difficult to even talk about. And, even at the smartest neuroscientists don't have a full picture of exactly what these things mean or how to interpret them. But we can reliably say that there's certain pathways, or sometimes they're called networks, that are associated with different ways of being. And so that first way where we were saying, okay, this is where I'm going to put my attention, and I'm going to get a cookie if I get there. Or, on a certain timeline, I'm going to get a cookie because the bell rang. Or I get this certain notification on my phone and it feels good or it gets me excited. So that's more associated with these kind of more central parts of our brain, which are really deep in there. That's called the ventromedial reward pathway. A lot of really old structures in there, and some newer structures that are particular to the human brain, but a lot of older structures that are preserved across all sorts of different creatures. Some brain structures that are more particular to human beings and our, amazing capacity and our brain's unique abilities are more associated with this intention side of things, which is to say, I'm going to choose how to orient towards things that are coming in because perhaps there's some sort of task or there's some sort of context where the way that I'm orienting is actually more important than what I'm doing. What I'm doing is perhaps you might say like a more primitive, animalistic way of engaging. I have to be hunting for food or listening for this sound or on guard for this such and such thing. But this more human capacity to say, I'm going to be kind uh, in each of my interactions today. It's actually a different way of being, and that's more associated with a number of different areas. One of the core areas a number of years ago that really stood out as I was doing a lot of literature review was it's associated with a lot of activity in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. So it's like somewhere over here, and it's more of a recently developed or more of a, let's say, like a human area, not preserved across a lot of other species. What's important about that is just that we might think, okay, these are actually two different ways of being. And when we sit down for meditation, it's useful to really reflect for a moment on in what way am I bringing this very reward heavy mind into my practice? And the flip side of that reward is also punishment. So actually, they're not two separate things. When we build up this expectation for reward or the way that things are supposed to be, or this goal orientation, we also have a lot of judgments, which are just inherent when we don't get there. When we say, oh, fuck, well, I was at five, and then I lost it. I started thinking about something else. Or maybe we don't even remember we were at five. We have no idea what number we were on when we lost it. That could be very frustrating. That can be very frustrating if our orientation is, I need to get to 10 over and over. Um, and so you can start to notice that happening in your mind and say, okay, well, why am I even here? Why am I sitting down here? You can use the word goal, but really you might be orienting towards the intention. What's my intention of actually sitting down here? And most likely it's not to get to 10, because probably you didn't even know that we were counting to 10 before you came today. Most likely it's, hey, I want to feel a little more settled, or I want to be more present with what's happening in my life, something of that nature. And so you can set that as an intention. Part of setting an intention is that it is inherently more of a feeling process. And that might not be intuitive to us all of the time. It's actually much simpler to say, okay, here's the goal. This is very easily defined. Did I make it to 10 or did I not make it to 10? Intention is a little more slippery. And so some of you maybe have been in a meditation practice that I've led or somebody else has led that loses a little bit of form or shape. And, I know I've led a number of these where it's kind of like just sit there and see what happens. And that could be very disorienting because you don't have that same ease of saying, okay, I know what success looks like when I'm sitting here in meditation. Actually, it's moving you out of a space of defining whether it was successful or not. This is very uncomfortable, but it's actually part of learning how to move about with intention in our lives, and certainly in our meditation practice. So you can begin to learn, oh, okay, well, when I sit down here, it's not about whether I had a good meditation or a bad meditation. It's that I'm actually just learning to sit down here without an agenda. And as I get better at sitting down here without an agenda, maybe I get better at moving about in my life without so much of an agenda. And as I get better at that, well, maybe it's easier to actually relate to other people because I'm not bringing so much of myself into a conversation. Or maybe it's um easier to take a difficult conversation in a less personal way because I'm not so focused on an outcome that I want to have. And so, paradoxically, by learning how to actually bring less of our agenda and less of our judgment and definition of what success is or what failure is, we actually sometimes get better results and outcomes in our life, which is pretty cool. Uh, so you can tell that part of your brain that wants that goal orientation, like, okay, well, you will get a cookie. It'll just take a little bit longer and take a little bit longer. And these two different ways of being, they are two different ways of being. They can be felt differently, and they're associated with different types of brain activity. Um, but they're not fundamentally opposed to each other. And actually, they can work quite nicely together. There's a reason that I started to practice today by saying, let's begin by counting to 10. And then later said, okay, who cares if you're making it to 10? I don't know. And, you might know, but it doesn't actually matter. You're probably not going to remember in a few minutes how many times you made it to 10. Um, and the reason for that is that as we start with a little more concrete definition of, okay, here's what success looks like. It looks like making it to 10. It looks like making it at least to the next number. Our mind actually starts to settle because it stops getting so focused on all these things that are distressing to us or uncomfortable to us. And as it starts to settle and get a little more comfortable, now it's easier to tap into intention because you're not so distracted by your distress, which is on some level constant. We have, whether we're aware of it or not, we have a constant amount of dis-ease and distress or distaste for our moment to moment reality. Sometimes it's very easy to feel that when things feel really shitty. Other times it's not so easy to feel that, like when things feel really good, we can often lose track of that. Sometimes in a moment where it feels good, the way that shows up is that we don't want what feels good to go away and we start feeling afraid about it slipping away. Um, Anyways, I'm getting slightly off track with that, but the point is actually, as we initially start to define things more towards attention, let me have a very specific goal and define what success can look like. The mind can start to settle. And as the mind starts to settle, we can move towards intention, which is like, why am I actually showing up here? How do I want to be in this moment? How do I want to feel? And that can become the guiding light so that we don't sit down and end up frustrating ourselves with the fact that our mind is very busy. Actually, we can just feel calm and busy-minded. It helps, and most of us have done these practices together too. It helps to also start to get good at feeling uh, what feels pleasant or good in our practice. That actually helps us set an intention. It's kind of like a North Star. And that's something that we'll be focusing on in later parts of the series. Is kind of blending these two of like, oh, that feels good. Maybe that good feeling can start to become kind of like a goal, and you start to blend this attention and intention into one, and that can take you a lot deeper and feel pretty good. and translate really nicely to your external reality. So that's a initial thing that I have to say about attention and intention. I'm gonna turn the recording off in a moment, and I'd love to just hear maybe if anybody wants to share about their experience between the first part of the practice and the second part of the practice, or any questions that come up or have come up over the course of me talking. So let me turn this off.